I'll never forget the story of the snow-white gorilla. It's a story about a bond that even science couldn't explain. It all started with Emma Carter, a researcher who, in 2006, risked everything to steal a genetically modified gorilla infant from a laboratory. That night changed everything, not just for her, but for the 5-month-old gorilla she named Kesi. Controversial experiments in genetic engineering were gaining momentum then. Emma, working for a private animal rights organization, had been watching a suspicious laboratory for months. When she finally got inside, what she saw shook her to her core. In a small cage, in the middle of a cold, sterile room, lay a gorilla infant with fur as white as snow. The other gorillas were dark-colored, natural-looking, but this infant, it defied nature. Looking at the files, Emma learned the truth. This wasn't an albino. This was the result of deliberate genetic intervention, scientists tampering with its genes to display it as a rare species, perhaps even to sell it to wealthy collectors. But at that moment, the tiny being was living without a mother, without love, only as an experimental object. Something broke in Emma's heart, and she made her decision. She couldn't leave him there. That night, risking her career, her freedom, perhaps even her life, she took Kesi out of there. She chose the name Kesi, meaning hope in an ancient language, because that's what he was for her. He was proof that humanity could still do good, that love was stronger than science. The first days weren't easy. Kesi had been traumatized. He cried through the nights, trembled in Emma's arms. But Emma didn't give up. She fed him, warmed his milk, sang lullabies for hours, slowly gaining his trust by simply being there every time he woke up. As months passed, their bond grew stronger. As Kesi grew, his white fur shone even brighter. But it wasn't just physical development. His intelligence, his ability to empathize, and his loving gaze amazed everyone, as if he was now receiving back all the love he had lost in that laboratory cell, multiplied. By the time he turned 3, Kesi was already too big to climb on Emma's shoulder. But he still came to her side every morning, rested his huge head on her knees, and waited for her hands to wander through his fur. That ritual became their most sacred moment, a time for a silent conversation they both shared. Emma taught Kesi simple things: how to peel fruit, how to play games, even how to open a simple lock. She'd shown him this last skill as a fun activity, turning small buttons in the right sequence. Kesi thought it was a game, but it was actually one of the most important gifts Emma had given him: the ability to understand the idea of freedom. Years passed. When Kesi turned 10, he was already over 200 kilograms. His white fur literally glowed in the sunlight, and his amber eyes carried a deep wisdom. Emma knew she could no longer keep him at home. It would be dangerous and wrong. But the solution she found felt right. The local rehabilitation center agreed to accept Kesi. It was a professional facility designed for injured animals in need of protection, with large open areas. Kesi would be safe there, cared for by experts, and able to move freely. The day she took him there, Emma felt something tear inside her. Kesi looked at her, and there was an understanding in those big eyes, as if he knew she thought this was best for him. As she left him, Emma stroked his head one last time and whispered in his ear, "I will always love you, Kesi. You're my son." And Kesi touched Emma's face one last time. Those giant fingers touched hers as if making a promise that he would never forget her. After that day, Emma visited him every week. She couldn't make direct contact, but watching him from behind the bars was enough. Every time Kesi saw her, he would stand up, place his hands on the bars, and look at her in a way that seemed to say, "Mom, you're here. Everything is..." Time was merciless, especially toward Emma. When she reached 65, I remember reading once about a woman who reunited with her gorilla son after a decade apart. It stayed with me for days, the image of their connection. What struck me most was the gorilla's understanding, his memory, and the depth of emotion that transcended species. It was a story of love, loss, and a final poignant farewell. Emma's body began to betray her. The strength in her legs diminished first, then her hands started to tremble. The diagnosis came after a while: amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, or motor neuron disease, a merciless progressive illness. Within a year, she could no longer walk and was confined to a wheelchair. Her speech became difficult, and even forming words required effort. She was imprisoned in a body where her mind remained sharp, her feelings deep. That, I imagine, was the most painful part. Understanding and feeling everything, yet unable to fully express it. Visiting Kesi was no longer possible. Her health simply wouldn't allow it. She hadn't seen him in months, and the absence consumed her. Knowing her time was running out, she desperately wanted to see him one last time. Her sister, Sarah, understanding the situation, made a plan. She contacted the Rehabilitation Center, secured special permission, and one spring morning, on a beautiful day with cherry blossoms dancing in the air, she took Emma to the center in her wheelchair. As they moved along the main path, people gave Emma pitying looks, but she didn't notice. Her attention was fixed on something in the distance. Kesi, standing like a white giant in a large outdoor area. Sarah slowly pushed the wheelchair toward the garden. The spring sun warmed Emma's face, and cherry blossoms landed in her hair, but she only wanted to see him. Kesi, her son. They stopped just before the bars. Kesi was sitting on a large rock with his back turned. Emma tried to call him, but only rasping sounds came out. Tears streamed from her eyes. Being so close and unable to see him was unbearable. Sarah touched her shoulder. "Let me call him," she whispered. But then, as if by a miracle, Kesi turned his head. Perhaps he felt the vibration of her voice, or maybe it was just instinct. But when that huge head turned, his amber eyes found Emma. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. Kesi's eyes locked onto Emma. All the noise in the world seemed to cease. There was only the woman and the gorilla, mother and son, reunited after years. Kesi slowly stood up. His massive 210-kilogram body moved with a strange grace. Each step toward the bars had purpose. He had seen her, and he remembered her. Reaching the bars, he stopped, gripping the metal, his head bowed, his eyes fixed on Emma. Then he made a sound, deep and almost human, as if in pain. A characteristic sound gorillas make when they are sad. Sarah brought the wheelchair closer, leaving only a meter between Kesi and Emma, the bars their only obstacle. Emma tried to reach out with her trembling hand, but she lacked the strength. When Kesi understood, he extended his own giant hand through the bars. His fingers touched hers. The touch was like electricity. 10 years. She hadn't been able to fully touch him for 10 years. Now those giant fingers intertwined with hers, warm, soft, and familiar. Kesi's fingers began to tremble. Was he crying? Could gorillas cry? Emma didn't know, but she knew they were both feeling the same pain. A word escaped her lips. Kai. That huge head bowed even further, leaning against the bars as if trying to hug Emma. Then something strange happened. Kesi pulled his hand back, turned his head slightly to the side, examined the lock on the bars, and took action. It was the simple lock mechanism Emma had taught him as a game years ago. 3 buttons that, when turned in a specific sequence, would open the door. A simple but effective system designed to prevent visitors from accidentally opening the door. But Kesi remembered. He turned the first button right, the second button left, the third button right. A click sounded. The lock had opened. Sarah gasped. "Oh my God," she whispered. Security guards, noticing the situation on the monitors, panicked. The alarm sounded, but Emma wasn't afraid. Looking into Kesi's eyes, she saw no danger, only love. Kesi slowly pushed the door. The metal bars creaked open, and the giant gorilla, for the first time in 10 years, stepped outside freely. Security teams came running, tranquilizer darts and guns in hand. "Get back!" someone shouted. "The animal has gotten loose." But Kesi didn't even look at them. He only looked at Emma, and with slow, careful steps, as if approaching something breakable, he moved toward her. Sarah had frozen behind the chair, unable to move. Emma tried to signal with her hand, a difficult "let him," she managed to say. Sarah didn't understand. "What?" Emma repeated. "Let him." Sarah's eyes filled with tears, not wanting to leave her sister alone with the giant animal. But seeing the determination in Emma's eyes, she slowly backed away. One of the security team shouted, "No, get away from there. This is very dangerous." I've seen many things in my years working with historical documents, but some moments defy explanation, even by science. I remember reading about a meeting between a woman and a gorilla. It was described as the meeting of 2 souls, a mother and son's farewell after years apart. The image stayed with me for days. Sarah had told everyone to stop, to just wait. Kesi, the gorilla, was right in front of Emma, his giant shadow covering her. Sunlight broke on his white fur, creating a halo. Slowly, so slowly, he crouched down until their faces were almost level. Kesi's giant hand reached out, his fingers touching Emma's face with incredible gentleness, as if she were a child. He caressed her cheek, took a cherry blossom petal from her hair, examined it, then gently placed it on the ground. Then he rested his huge head on Emma's knees. Everyone froze. Security, visitors, staff, watching this moment, scarcely breathing. It wasn't just animal behavior. It felt like something far deeper. Emma raised her trembling hand and put it on Kesi's head, feeling the warm, soft, familiar white fur between her fingers. Tears flowed from her eyes, but it wasn't pain anymore. It was gratitude, thankfulness. While Kesi kept his head on Emma's knees, he made a strange, almost human-like whimpering, a sound gorillas make only in the deepest emotional moments, as if saying, "Mom, you're here. I missed you. I never forgot you." Words fell from Emma's mouth, difficult and choppy, but coming straight from her heart. "I love you, Kesi," she said. Kesi, lifting his head slightly, looked at her. There were no tears in his amber eyes, but there was something, an understanding, an acceptance, as if he knew she wouldn't be with him much longer. His giant hand reached for the wheelchair armrest, carefully examining the metal edges. Then he placed his hand on Emma's hand. Their hands joined under the sun as cherry blossoms fell. In that moment, Emma realized Kesi was being careful not to hit the edge of the wheelchair. Every movement was calculated, controlled, because he knew Emma was fragile and he wanted to protect her. Minutes passed and no one interfered. The security teams lowered their weapons. They could see it wasn't a threat, but love. Dr. Alan Thompson, the center's director, stepped forward, watching Emma and Kesi. His eyes welled up. He had worked with animals for years, but had never witnessed such a bond. Let Emma rest. Kesi lifted his head and looked at the doctor, then turned back to Emma. There was hesitation in his eyes, as if he knew that if he left her, he would never see her again. And perhaps he was right. Emma, gathering her last strength, gave him a signal, gently pushing him away with her hand. "Go," she whispered. "Be well." Kesi placed his giant hand on Emma's hand one last time, holding it tightly, as if trying to transfer all the love within him with that touch. Then he slowly stood up, his eyes still on her. He took a few steps back, then stopped, turned around, looked at Emma one last time. In that look was everything: gratitude, love, farewell, and a silent promise that he would never forget her. Dr. Thompson slowly guided Kesi back inside the enclosure. Kesi wasn't interested in the fruits. He only looked back at Emma, his head turned, his eyes not leaving her. When the door closed, Kesi stood there, leaned against the bars, and stayed like that for a long time, motionless, silent, just watching Emma. Sarah moved behind the wheelchair. "Should we go?" she asked, her voice still trembling. Emma nodded slightly. Yes, it was time to go. But something wasn't breaking inside her. I'll never forget the story of Emma and Kesi. It's a story that proves love knows no language, no species, no barrier. A woman and a gorilla, connected by a bond that transcended everything. Even in the face of death, their love remained. The moon was full, white light filtering into the room. And at that moment, a strange feeling overcame her, as if Kesi were beside her, as if that giant hand were touching hers again. She closed her eyes and imagined Kesi, his white fur, his amber eyes, his giant but gentle hands. And she imagined that last day, that perfect day when cherry blossoms danced in the air, when the sun illuminated everything. "Thank you," she whispered into the darkness. "Thank you for letting me love you, Kesi." And that night, Emma fell asleep in peace. The next morning, Sarah couldn't wake her. Emma was gone, but there was a smile on her face, a peaceful, happy expression, as if she had seen a beautiful dream. When Dr. Thompson received the news, he cried. Emma had not only saved an animal's life, she had given him a life, a loving, meaningful life. How would they tell Kesi? How do you tell a gorilla that the person he loved most has died? But Kesi already knew that morning. He hadn't come to the bars as usual. For the first time in days, he didn't break his morning routine. He just sat in the farthest corner of his area, head bowed, motionless, as if mourning. Dr. Thompson made a decision. He asked Sarah for Emma's favourite shawl, and one morning, in the early hours, he left that shawl in Kesi's area. When Kesi saw the shawl, he froze. He approached, smelled it, and at that moment his giant body trembled. His hands grasped the shawl, brought it to his face, and smelled it for a long, long time. This was Emma's scent, lavender and daisy. Kesi had never forgotten that scent. He gently pressed the shawl to his chest, bowed his head. From that day on, Kesi slept with that shawl every night. In the morning, he would take it with him, protected it as if it were a treasure. This was Kesi's way of maintaining his connection with Emma. Months passed. Kesi slowly returned to normal. He ate, he played, he lived. But every evening at sunset, he would take that shawl with him and come to the bars. He would sit there, wait, and perhaps, in a way, Emma was always there. In every cherry blossom petal, in every ray of sunlight, Emma was in Kesi's heart, just as Kesi was in Emma's heart. A year later, the Rehabilitation Centre erected a special monument in Emma's memory, made of white marble. It was a small but meaningful monument. On it was a figure of a woman and a gorilla, hand in hand, and underneath was an Indian, Emma Carter, 1964 to 2026. She taught that love knows no language, species, or barrier. On the day of the monument's unveiling, Sarah was there, and Kesi was there too, from behind the bars, watching silently. When the ceremony ended, Sarah went to Kesi's side, looked at him. Those amber eyes gave Sarah a sad but grateful look. "You loved my sister very much, didn't you?" said Sarah, with tears. Kesi bowed his head slightly, as if confirming. "She loved you very much too," said Sarah. "Know that." And Kesi at that moment made a strange sound, soft, sweet, sad, one of those rare sounds with which gorillas express their deepest feelings. Years passed. Kesi lived a long and happy life. Grey strands had appeared among his white fur, but that sparkle in his eyes never disappeared, and he carried Emma's shawl with him until he died. One autumn morning, Kesi peacefully passed away. Veterinarians said his heart had stopped, but caretakers said something else. He finally went to be with Emma. They buried Kesi right next to Emma's monument and wrote on it, "Kesi, 2006 to 2023. He knew what love was, and he never forgot it." That night, the full moon illuminated both graves, Emma and Kesi, mother and son, two souls finally together again. And you could see cherry blossom petals dancing in the wind, even though it wasn't the season, as if Emma and Kesi were somehow still showing their love. It's funny, the stories that stay with you. Sometimes it's not the grand sweep of history, but the quiet moments, the hints of connection. Like the thought that two people, amidst everything, were together. And as I sit here, surrounded by these documents, I can't help but feel a sense of completion, as if a small piece of the puzzle has been placed.